This beautiful girl is named Lee Sol. She never imagined that she was the princess being sought by the president of Korea. Before being crowned as a princess at the age of 26, Lee Sol lived with her adoptive family and studied at a university, majoring in Korean history. To earn extra money, Lee Sol spent her time working part-time at a traditional performing arts show. She was chosen to wear a princess costume, and it was at that moment that she met a handsome diplomat named Hae-young.
공주 왔죠?
To welcome important guests from abroad, Hae-young persuaded Lee Sol to continue wearing the royal gown and promised to pay her of $100. However, in reality, Hae-young never ended up paying and claimed that he didn't have any cash. That made Lee Sol furious. She kept following him everywhere to make sure Hae-young truly paid her money. The government, which was actively promoting the restoration of the royal lineage, received full support from the Daehan Group, conglomerate none other than Hae-young's family business. It turns out that in the past, Hae-young's grandfather was a trusted confidant of the royal family who was often given the mandate to search for Emperor Sunjong's great-grandchild. One day, as his grandfather had instructed, Hae-young hurried to find where Lee Sol lived. As soon as he arrived at the address, Hae-young was completely stunned to see that the girl who had been following him the other day was actually Lee Sol, the very person his grandfather had been looking for. He was furious because he felt deceived just the day before at the art gallery exhibition. Lee Sol had introduced herself as Eun Bayeol. The young man began to suspect that Lee Sol was a con artist who had deliberately approached him to swindle his wealth. Hae-young, who had previously been friendly, suddenly became arrogant and full of suspicion. His arrival, which came with the promise of high pay, was met with enthusiasm by Lee Sol, especially when Hae-young made the decision to stay for a few more days to thoroughly confirm the girl's identity. Feeling at an advantage and comfortable, Lee Sol allowed Hae-young to stay at her mother's inn, but she set the rate at 3 times the normal price.
요금은 3불입니다.
At night, Hae-young couldn't sleep well because he kept thinking about Lee Sol's identity. He suspected that the girl was his grandfather's biological daughter from a mistress. For a moment, he greeted the girl who was still engrossed in watching a movie in the yard while enjoying some popcorn. Lee Sol shared that she had been adopted from an orphanage when she was 6 years old. To this day, she is still waiting for the return of her father who disappeared a long time ago. Hearing that, Hae-young vowed to unite her to her dad.
외교관이잖아. 뭐 너 혼자 찾는 것보단 낫지 않겠어?
The next morning, Lee Sol received a visit from Professor Young-woo, who was searching for an ancient manuscript left behind by Emperor Sunjong, believed to be buried around the house. Since his college days, Young-woo had been obsessed with finding the crown prince and the princess, who were rumored to still be alive and had disappeared. However, he was disappointed because his finding on the emperor's literature was claimed by Yeonju and exhibited in the art gallery. Their relationship became strained because Young-woo was angry on Ju's audacious actions.
너도 나한테 그 정도 염치는 있어야지.
Learning the bitter fact that Young-woo was his fiancé's first love made Hae-young furious. She retaliated against Lee Sol's actions from the other day by pretending to be his girlfriend in front of Young-woo. In the end, Lee Sol offered to team up with her so they could each win the heart of the one they loved. Haven't had time to negotiate yet, Hae-young urged Lee Sol to leave for Seoul because the grandfather wanted to meet the princess soon. Upon arriving at grandfather's house, the girl was greeted with such emotion that he immediately knelt before her.
Mama.
While crying, the grandfather then revealed Lee Sol's origins, which she was actually the great-granddaughter of the emperor. He gave an ancient box containing portraits of the late emperor and the crown prince. Before Joseon transitioned into the Republic of Korea, the emperor deliberately exiled his son to a foreign land and hid his identity for safety reasons. The emperor's descendants lived in hardship, while the royal wealth was officially managed by the Daehan Group. Based on the emperor's mandate, Grandfather promised that once he found the princess, he would hand over all the wealth half to the country and the other half to the princess as the rightful heir. It felt like a dream. Lee Sol was completely shocked to hear it. And on top of that, when she found out that her father had passed away, she immediately broke down in tears and tried to run away from grandfather. Equally astonished, Hae-young tries to chase and hug her as Lee Sol cries. The girl was truly devastated, convinced that her father was still alive just as he had promised he would return someday. After feeling abandoned in the orphanage for 20 years, Lee Sol wasn't ready to accept the truth and felt unworthy of being called the princess. Lee Sol asked Hae-young to take her home to Danha's house, but she wasn't allowed to enter and felt cold under the falling snow. Unable to leave the princess alone, Hae-young briefly offered Lee Sol to stop by his house for dinner. He jokingly and said would charge her for the room and dinner, just like he was charged when he stayed at the inn. While enjoying their conversation and the steak, both of them were startled by the sudden arrival of Yeonju, forcing Lee Sol to hide in the room. Yeonju's arrival aims to gather information on the status of the princess, rumored found. This clearly threatened her existence as someone close to the Daehan group family. Because if the princess is legally recognized, then automatically the wealth of the Daehan group will fall into her hands, and Hae-young, who is touted as the heir, will not receive a single penny from the ownership of the Daehan group. As the prospective wife of Hae-young, Yeonju wants to ensure whether her fiancé is willing to support this plan or will sabotage it. At the same time, Lee Sol felt an unbearable stomachache. She also asked Hae-young to immediately take Yeonju out so that there would be no misunderstanding. She kept calling, but Hae-young was hesitant to move because he hadn't answered Yeonju's question. The girl couldn't hold the stomach pain any longer and was forced to run out of the room to the bathroom before the guest left. From the start, Yeonju noticed Hae-young's behavior was odd, as he wasn't focused on her fearing his fiancé would catch Lee Sol. Even though he tried to hide it, in the end, Hae-young couldn't escape when Yeonju pressed him about why there were women's shoes in his house. Unexpectedly, Lee Sol suddenly came out of the bathroom and Yeonju saw her. She strongly suspected that her fiancé was having a special relationship with Lee Sol. Hae-young suddenly turned pale and couldn't say anything. Yeonju held back her jealousy and chose to leave. She let out her frustration by meeting Young-woo and hugging him. The two end up spending the night together, and Young-woo chooses to forgive Yeonju's mistake. She was still trying to gather information about the missing descendant of the emperor. Meanwhile, news of the princess's return was officially released across various media outlets. However, her identity remains undisclosed to this day. The grandfather told Hae-young to shield Lee Sol from the media spotlight. He also visited the campus and hugged Lee Sol, covering her face from the camera flashes. Rumors became inevitable. In the end, Hae-young was forced to admit that the girl he brought was his fiancée so that the media would stop pursuing her. One problematic journalist grilled and tried to expose Lee Sol and claiming that she is the princess protected by Daehan. However, the news remained unclear and unconfirmed until the truth could be clarified. In the end, Hae-young dragged Lee Sol into Daehan Hotel to escape journalists. The girl was confused and even thought that Hae-young was going to ask her to check, in which led her to accidentally hit his face until his nose to bleed. The scandal of Hae-young's engagement to a mysterious girl who is still a student successfully became a hot trending topic, even surpassing the news about the discovery of the princess.
세상에 저렇게 방송해도 돼요?
That made Yeonju furious, and she demanded clarification from Hae-young. What was more surprising was that she saw Lee Sol in the same room at the Daehan Hotel. To cut down on misunderstandings, Hae-young revealed the secret that Lee Sol is the princess who must be protected from the media, until Yeonju, who originally hated the girl, now suddenly respects her. He was only pretending to be her fiancé in front of the media to suppress the news of the princess's return.
물론 취직도 시켜주고.
저도 도울게요.
As Hae-young's fiancé, she doesn't want her future husband to hand over all of Daehan Group's assets to Lee Sol, who appeared without knowing the ups and downs his family went through in building the company. Yeonju and Hae-young finally made an agreement they would comply with all the princess's requests as long as he can get their share. Lee Sol's request wasn't extravagant. She just wanted to escape the complexities of royal issues and live peacefully abroad to continue her studies. That was immediately granted by Yeonju, who promised to help with the immigration documents right away.
이분 아닌데?
농담 아니거든요.
Before she can sign the contract, Lee Sol is forced to rush to meet her grandfather on a private helicopter. It turns out the two of them were visiting the grave of the prince who died 20 years ago. Filled with regret, the grandfather apologized to the princess, saying that because of his carelessness, the crown prince had an accident which led to the princess disappearing and being abandoned in an orphanage. Lee Sol can only remember the sad incident of her father's departure. That made her deeply resent her grandfather and try to oppose all of his requests. The grandfather realized that everything he had in his possession actually belonged entirely to the princess, and it was his duty to protect it and return it to her. Under the grandfather's orders, Hae-young was appointed responsible for looking after Lee Sol and ensure her safety so that the princess does not run away again.
마이크 갖다 줘? 대구 떠들래?
Although she could hide her identity from anyone while on campus, Lee Sol could not deny in front of Young-woo that she was the princess. Now even the professor was showing her special attention. He even drove her home to Danha's house. The two of them hadn't had the chance to talk closely because Hae-young immediately dragged her into the car to keep her safe when reporters approached Danha. In the end, Hae-young who brought Lee Sol to her mother's inn, who quite far from Seoul. He also wanted to hand over a photo of the late crown prince to Lee Sol to keep as a keepsake. His arrival was warmly welcomed by Lee Sol's foster mother, as she thought that Hae-young and her foster child were a couple looking for a refreshing and serene place to stay. She continues to interview Hae-young and asked how far their relationship progressed. She even deliberately locked the two of them in a room so they could be more romantic and less shy. After seeing a photo of her late father, Lee Sol suddenly became emotional and expressed her simple hope that she just wanted to continue her studies abroad to be on par with Professor Young-woo, whom she loved very much. According to Lee Sol, her departure could reduce the media's enthusiasm in spotlighting her. With pleasure, Hae-young granted that request and ensured everything, including the comfort of her foster family while he was abroad.
빠르면 빠를수록 좋겠지.
Before deciding to leave, Lee Sol wrote a farewell letter to her mother. Leaving without saying goodbye and still keeping her true identity a secret made her burdened and guilty. She wanted to be a devoted daughter, even if just for a moment, by preparing various special dishes, tidying up the house, and doing good deeds to leave a lasting impression on her mother. Despite being sad, Lee Sol prepared to head to the airport with determination. Just as she was about to depart, the immigration officer, knowing Lee Sol's identity, suddenly stopped her boarding. That's because Lee Sol is the most wanted and protected person by the Korean government and is not allowed to leave secretly. It turns out the one who stopped Lee Sol from flying to Egypt was the grandfather who insisted the princess remain in Korea to occupy his throne. The girl was embarrassed because she had sent farewell letters to her mother and her professor. She wanted to take them back and retrieve the letter she had placed inside her mother's Bible, which she usually brought to church. Unfortunately, he was too late. The letter was in the pastor's hands and read to the congregation. Knowing the letter's contents, including Lee Sol's plan to run away, made her mother furious and accused Lee Sol of being pregnant with her boyfriend. However, the girl kept denying it and claimed she just wanted to go on vacation. There was no other way for Hae-young to convince Lee Sol's adoptive mother than confessing they intended to elope because they didn't receive her blessing. His identity as the son of a conglomerate is also known to Lee Sol's mother, so he gets full support to go with his. When the media was busy reporting on the whereabouts of the princess, grandfather asked Hae-young to come home immediately and immediately said goodbye to Lee Sol and her mother. He told the girl to stay at the guest house and avoid crowded places to stay safe from the media frenzy. Before leaving, he pretended to act affectionately in front of her mother so he wouldn't suspect their ruse.
또 있어야 돼. 알았지? 응? 빨리 갔다 올게.
Meanwhile, Lee Sol seems to ignore Hae-young's message and still goes to campus to meet the professor. The girl wanted to make sure her letter had reached the hands of her beloved. He's so embarrassed if her love letter had already been read even though he had cancelled her trip to Egypt. Unexpectedly, Lee Sol's presence on campus was discovered by several reporters, forcing her to run frantically to hide. This time, it was Youngwoo who moved to grab Lee Sol's hand and secure her towards the office room. Hearing the commotion in the media, Hae-young immediately goes to campus to protect her. When he got there, he continued to scold Lee Sol until the girl refused to come with him and preferred to be with the professor. At this time, the news about the princess's appointment had been officially released, and the whole world now knew her identity. Even while escaping, the employees at the gas station tried to take pictures of Lee Sol to document it on social media. To be honest, Hae-young hates Lee Sol's position because it will threaten all the assets that he should have inherited. If he becomes poor, Yeonju will automatically leave him and the wedding plans will be cancelled, so he tries to find a way to keep Lee Sol away from his throne. The young diplomat even threatened his grandfather, saying he would kidnap and tie up the princess, then throw her somewhere far away so his grandfather couldn't reach her. That made the grandfather furious and worried that his grandson might do something reckless.
너 정신이 제대로 배긴 놈이야!
His hatred grew even deeper, especially after learning that his father had been cast out by his grandfather for refusing to restore the imperial bloodline. Together with Yeonju, Hae-young began a movement against his grandfather and joined opposition council members who demonstrated against the president's plan to approve Lee Sol's position. The council members also spread vile rumors that the princess was a drunkard who frequently changed partners and whose marriages were never officially registered by the state. So Lee Sol is considered to not have the credibility to occupy the position of princess. The plan to take Lee Sol away far is a form of bluff against the grandfather to ensure his position as the heir of Daehan remains stable. As they traveled farther from Korea, the two took the time to enjoy some seaside cuisine. The girl was truly devastated when she heard the heartbreaking news about her father being accused of betraying the nation and deemed unworthy of being called a prince. She kept dodging in front of the shop guests until Hae-young dragged her out.
빨리.
The girl could do was cry by the seaside, recalling the few memories she had left of her father from her childhood. In her memories, her life had always been lived in hiding, and even as an adult, she still had to stay hidden because many eyes were watching who waiting to take her position. The diplomat now by her side wasn't an ally, but an adversary who wanted to bring her down. Hae-young's words mentioning the crown prince's disgrace made the girl's heart hurt. He asserted that the emperor's son shouldn't be hiding if he truly believed he was innocent. In the end, with all her determination, Lee Sol decided to stop hiding from people in order to clear her father's good name. She wanted to let the entire nation know that her father had never done what she was accused of.
그거 다 거짓말이에요. 내가 다 바로잡을 거예요.
Amidst their conversation, suddenly a young shopkeeper came and informed them that there was a group of people looking for Lee Sol. It turned out to be the grandfather along with several bodyguards ready to escort the princess to the palace. The girl was now officially placed in a luxurious palace and welcomed by dozens of handmaidens ready to serve her. It feels like a dream. Lee Sol is now in the grand palace that was specially built for her. She was served by dozens of attendants, and anything she wished for could be granted in the blink of an eye. However, when the princess has occupied the palace at the same time, Hae-young has to lose everything. Now, all the facilities he had enjoyed were confiscated by the government because the assets had been transferred under the name of a royal citizen. Even the shoes she was wearing weren't spared from being seized. Everything is the opposite of before. Lee Sol becomes a princess, while Hae Young suddenly becomes poor. He looked for a way to keep his privileges and threatened to immediately announce his marriage to the princess. Lee Sol, who heard the threat, felt wrong and reported it to Professor Young Woo, until finally the girl asked the professor to take her away to a safe place so she wouldn't have to meet Hae Young again. On the other hand, Young Woo had started to open his heart to Lee Sol and began looking for excuses to see her. However, just as the two were about to run away, they were caught by Chef Gun-ee, who chased after them on the road, until causing Young Woo to lose focus and crash the car into a road construction barrier. Lee Sol was injured and had to be rushed to the hospital. While in treatment, Hae Young and Young Woo compete to be the one in charge of the patient. However, in the end, Young Woo was forced to give up and let Hae Young look after the girl. Even though her condition was still unstable and she had only recently begun receiving medical treatment, Lee Sol decided to leave the hospital. This is because he had to give his room to a child patient who had run out of rooms. However, unexpectedly, before going home, Lee Sol suddenly collapsed unconscious beside the car. Hae Young was very panicked because he thought the girl was pretending to be sick to avoid him. He immediately took her home and treated her and looked after her throughout the night. Because the fever wouldn't go down, Hae Young used a compress and made sure the condition improved. He stayed up all night by her bedside to take care of the princess. Until the next morning, Hae Young was still so attentive to her and made a bowl of warm porridge for her breakfast. He even fed Lee Sol himself, as her hands were still in pain from the bruises on her arm and shoulder. Their closeness didn't last long, as Lee Sol became furious again after discovering a document containing a series of cruel news reports about her father. She didn't expect that Hae Young was really the main mastermind behind the spread of false news about her father. The two of them attacked other as Hae Young defended himself and insisting he wouldn't let the princess leave easily and would keep hindering her. His method of spreading the news was considered effective in making the public question the royal family's credibility.
근데 그럼에도 불구하고 내 가장 큰 진심은
In the end, Lee Sol left Hae Young's house feeling emotional. She threatened that she would never forgive him or meet with him again. As soon as she stepped outside, she was immediately greeted by her grandfather who was about to take her to meet the president. Lee Sol's arrival at the palace was warmly welcomed by the president, as he wanted to use the princess as a strong background to support his run in the next presidential election. He aimed to gain public sympathy by treating the royal family well. The girl didn't fully understand what was being asked of her, which was to cooperate with him as a token of gratitude for approving the restoration of her long-forgotten family lineage. He wanted the princess to study diligently so she could present herself elegantly as someone in the public eye. Not only that, the president also personally met with a member of the opposition council and urged him to stop bothering the princess. Meanwhile, Yeonju, who hasn't remained silent about confiscating Hae Young's assets, is now taking steps to attack. She volunteered to be placed as the chief director of the royal division responsible for managing the royal assets, even organizing the intricacies of the royal family's activities. She did all of this in order to control Lee Sol and remove her from the throne as soon as possible. Her request was accepted by the grandfather because Yeonju was the only person considered worthy to lead the royal division. Similarly, Hae Young also moved quickly to strategize. He went straight to the president and offered himself as the princess's private tutor. His proposal was promptly accepted by the president. These two people agreed to help each other in bringing down the princess and became true enemies.
저 환원 목록 부탁한 거 어떻게 됐어?
After meeting the president, the exhausted Lee Sol immediately wanted to rest in his room. However, just as he was about to close his eyes, he suddenly remembered Haeyoung gently touching his forehead and taking care of him last night. The feelings of hatred and the budding seeds of love truly made Lee Sol feel conflicted. The next day, he was surprised by Haeyoung's sudden arrival in his room, waking him from his sleep. At first, he thought it was just a dream, but it turned out Haeyoung was really in his room and said that she would keep an eye on Lee Sol for 24 hours.
외교통상부 박혜영 사무관입니다.
The handsome diplomat, his enemy, now introduced himself in front of him as the private tutor for the royal family. He boasted that he would discipline the princess by making her more disciplined. He also emphasized that he would stay in the palace and monitor the princess's learning progress to ensure it aligns with noble etiquette. On his first day of work, Lee Sol, who was fed up with him, firmly refused if her tutor was Haeyoung. She argued that this would surely spark rumors of their previous scandal. However, in the end, the girl was left with no choice and had to accept it because Haeyoung received full support from the president and had met the requirements to become the princess's private tutor. On the other hand, Grandpa questioned the hidden motives behind why his grandson was willing to take on the task of teaching the princess, even though he actually despised her. The young man also emphasized that he did not want to end up in disgrace like his father and chose to become a servant of the kingdom. He also pleaded with his grandfather to return his assets as compensation.
그래서 할아버지가 원하시는 거 다 해드리려고요.
The initial learning material provided by Haeyoung was very difficult for Lee Sol because during college, she was known as a dull student who spent her time in class, just admiring the professor. She even received a 0 score, to the point where Haeyoung kept mocking her and threatened to report her to the president. Unwilling to accept Haeyoung's taunts, Lee Sol tried to snatch the exam paper from the young man's hand and chased him into the room. The two accidentally ended up on top of each other, leaving Lee Sol flustered and unable to sleep all night. Due to staying up late, the next morning, Lee Sol was hard to wake up, and eventually, Haeyoung had to carry her and throw her into the pool. Even though Haeyoung's attitude seemed excessively hateful towards the princess, at certain moments, the two appeared so in sync, like a supportive couple. He was very firm in teaching how to elegantly introduce oneself in front of the camera, which would later be featured on various internet channels. He also explained in detail about the royal family's lineage and apologized to the girl for tarnishing her father's good name. Haeyoung promised to help him find evidence and clarify the false news, circulating by looking for counter news, that the crown prince never sold royal heirlooms. The one who sold them to the antique shop was not the crown prince, but Lee Sol's adoptive father. Haeyoung turned to meet with the opposition party council that had spread the false hoax news and threatened to expose their corruption scandal if they dared to disturb the princess. Meanwhile, not only Haeyoung is working in the palace, but now Yeonjo also has full control over the royal activities, including the official letters of the princess's family. The cunning woman invited Lee Sol's adoptive mother and brother and asked them to sign a family separation letter. Currently, Lee Sol has been officially released from her adoptive family and designated as the legitimate child of Crown Prince Lee Han. Without anyone's knowledge, Yeonjo ordered servant Hong to act as a spy reporting on Lee Sol's movements with her fiancé. Feeling that they had successfully secured an important position in the palace, Haeyoung and Yeonjo took the time to drink wine together as a symbol of celebration for this victory. However, before they could chat, Yeonjo suddenly excused herself because she had an appointment with Young-woo. In this meeting, the professor admitted that he had been accepted to work as one of the official advisory staff of the division. With an emotional gaze, he decided to end his romantic relationship with Yeonjo because he was fed up with being treated as a backup man all this time. In addition to becoming an advisor, he also wanted to get closer to the princess who had admired him for years.
너 지나치게 이기적이고 비겁하니까.
Young-woo's recent statement really made Yoon-jo furious and left her speechless. She increasingly hated Lee Sol for making Young-woo turn away. Amidst her busy schedule in the kingdom, Lee Sol sneaks time to meet the professor and complain about every unpleasant treatment from Ha-young to him. Instead of getting angry, the professor actually suggested that Lee Sol continue to utilize Ha-young's abilities to improve herself, so that she would be worthy of being called a princess. The date for the press conference to officially introduce the princess to the public will be held in the next few days. Several renowned designers have been brought in to design clothing for the princess, and it turns out that the person responsible for organizing the press conference is Yoon Jo, the chief director of the royal division. Before the princess chose her outfit, she secretly invited her for a private conversation, harboring only resentment and hatred in her heart. Yoon Jo openly revealed that she would continue to find any way to bring down Lee Sol from her position. She even threatened to make the girl hated by all the people of Korea.
너 꼴 보기 싫은 사람 많고.
Hearing this, Lee Sol suddenly turned pale and was astonished, but she tried to remain calm and strong, hiding her inner turmoil. Not only did Yoon Jo fan the flames of hostility, but she also began to boldly corner Lee Sol in front of the designers by saying she was unworthy of wearing elegant clothes and was more suited to wearing simple attire, as it reflected the image of an orphan living in an orphanage. Ha-young did not defend the hurt Lee Sol at all. Instead, she further pressured the girl and emphasized that a princess should not be weak just because of someone's taunts. Because eventually, she will face much stronger enemies.
오늘은 애교야.
As the trusted director of the royal affairs, Yoon Jo increasingly gained full control over the princess's activities, including taking her to a spa. At night, Lee Sol hid in an antique car because she wanted to vent her anger at Yoon Jo and Ha-young. The entire staff thought she had disappeared and frantically searched for her, but it was Ha-young who managed to find her.
너 때문이다.
It turned out the girl was practicing to become a strong woman like the antagonist in a historical drama, so she could defeat the enemies around her. She admitted that she really hated Ha-young as her enemy, but her heart kept resisting, even though the two seemed like archenemies. A moment later, they were caring for each other like a couple. Lee Sol even brought a glass of milk to Ha-young's room, so she could sleep soundly. The next day, to clear the prince's name, Lee Sol's adoptive mother and brother were invited to the palace to negotiate about the case of the inscription sale that was accused of the prince. In fact, the real perpetrator was her adoptive father. Ha-young suggested that Lee Sol sacrifice her adoptive father, who had been involved in a criminal case, to restore the prince's good name. However, this was strongly opposed by Dan Ha. The girl was so cruel and kept intimidating her sister that she would never forgive Lee Sol if the bad news about her father spread in the media. As a child who had been cared for over 20 years, Lee Sol felt a dilemma, choosing between her adoptive father or her biological father. However, Ha-young kept urging her to choose her biological father because his name would be recorded in history, while her adoptive father was just an ordinary citizen. The girl was truly torn in making a decision, and could only burn all the evidence related to her adoptive father's case, who had sold all the royal relics. On her first day working at the palace, Lee Sol invited Young-woo to have a meal together as a welcoming gesture. She was very happy because she could freely share her grievances with the professor who was nearby. However, at the same dining table, Ha-young and Yoon Jo were already sitting together, which may be atmosphere. In the middle of the meal, Young-woo openly showed his attention to Lee Sol, which naturally sparked Yoon Jo's jealousy. The closeness between the two and the princess's expressive reaction to Young-woo's praise made Yoon Jo furious, and she sneered at her for what she considered to be impolite behavior. After keeping the secret for so long about the feud between the grandfather and Ha-young's father, Mr. Oh finally revealed the real reason why the grandfather ousted his father from the heir status. For a long time, Ha-young's father was known to be very ambitious and would stop at nothing to remove the crown prince from the company's ownership. Even when the prince was hiding in a remote area as a laborer, his life was never peaceful, because he kept receiving death threats. Grandfather didn't want the prince to be harmed, and ultimately chose to remove his own son. Now grandfather doesn't want that to happen again to Haeyoung and Princess Lee Sol. Hearing the bitter story of his father, made Haeyoung truly furious, and he threw everything in front of him as a form of venting. His heart was torn between hatred, sympathy, and the love that was slowly growing for Lee Sol. He didn't want to end up like his father, but he also wanted to reclaim his wealth, which was now entirely in the name of the princess. The next morning, Haeyoung secretly took Lee Sol to a bay. He wanted to find someone who once knew the crown prince. It turns out that when they were children, Lee Sol and the prince once lived there while escaping from his father's pursuit. The owner of the rental house still kept old photos and recounted his meeting with the prince, who always seemed fearful and wanted to protect his son. As a form of his happiness for finding someone who knew his father, that night, Lee Sol asked Haeyoung to join him for soju and seafood at a seaside stall.
그래야 늘 기자회견 때 안 떨고 말도 술술 나오지.
However, since he couldn't handle his drink, Lee Sol ended up heavily intoxicated and staggered around, forcing Haeyoung to carry him. The girl kept complaining and expressed her hatred towards Haeyoung. She was confused by the diplomat's behavior, sometimes acting like an enemy, yet often helping her like a vigilant bodyguard. When they reached a staircase, Lee Sol asked Haeyoung to tie his shoelaces that had come undone. In his heavily intoxicated state, unexpectedly, he suddenly planted a kiss on Haeyoung's cheek, making her heart. Not wanting to be outdone, the diplomat returned the sweet kiss on Lee Sol's lips and asked him to forget about tonight's incident.
지금 이건
Lee Sol suddenly fell asleep after being kissed by Haeyoung. The young man then laid him down in the inn and left him alone. Until the next morning, Lee Sol was approached by bodyguards, who intentionally came to prevent him from attending today's press conference. It turned out that all of this was orchestrated by Haeyoung, so that Lee Sol wouldn't interfere with his clarification regarding the prince's case. In front of all the council members present, Haeyoung apologized for the princess's absence, due to her unwell condition. He emphasized that he wanted to represent the princess, and also refute the news about the theft committed by the prince. In addition, he explained that his relationship with the princess was not a romantic one, but rather a relationship between a student and a teacher. Therefore, the act of restoring the royal family lineage was not a form of money laundering by the Daehan group, but rather a government policy to preserve cultural heritage. Haeyoung's statement just now truly left the grandfather and Yoon-jo astonished. After the event, he confessed to the grandfather that he had to do it because he is a loyal servant of the kingdom. However, what Haeyoung said to Mr. Oh was different. He threatened that he would not let the princess walk away easily and would block her just like her father did. Whatever was on Haeyoung's mind, he appeared confusing in the eyes of his opponent.
제가 어떤 선택을 했는지 아직 모르시잖아요.
To satisfy his curiosity, Yoon-jo pressed Haeyoung about his defense of the prince. He even suspected that his fiancée was starting to fall for Lee Sol. However, Haeyoung denied it and claimed that he did it solely to protect his assets from being seized again. Meanwhile, due to the spread of the clarification about the theft committed by his adoptive father, Lee Sol was shunned by his family. Upon returning from the bay, before heading to the palace, he visited his mother at the inn to beg for forgiveness. Even though he kept shouting and crying, his mother and sister refused to show themselves because they were already too disappointed.
엄마! 엄마!
When Young-woo arrived to pick him up, Lee Sol could only cry and express his sadness. He never expected to lose the trust of his adoptive family just to become a princess. In a reassuring tone, Young-woo indeed advised him that there would be many challenging and rocky paths in his life as a princess, and Lee Sol must not be fragile. He certainly assured that the clarification was necessary to set the record straight about the prince's good history.
일단 울음부터 그쳐. 어서.
Upon arriving at the palace, Young-woo had a confrontation with Hae-young because of the clarification. Lee Sol became frustrated and was disliked by her family. Instead of feeling guilty, Hae-young turned the tables and attacked Young-woo, saying he shouldn't be concerned about his student, since Lee Sol has now become his private pupil. Hearing that, Young-woo was not intimidated at all. He was determined to continue protecting the princess until the end of his days. To him, Lee Sol was not just an ordinary student, but a living historical record, and an obsession he had pursued for 10 years.
설이한텐 유일한 가족이야. 지금 그 가족을 잃을 수도 있어.
That night, Lee Sol vented her anger on Hae-young because she was disappointed at being abandoned just like that. She was also devastated because she was shunned by her own family. However, with a cold and emotional gaze, Hae-young only made her even sadder. The young man mocked that Lee Sol's sacrifice of losing her foster family was nothing compared to the throne she would gain. The girl cried in front of the room, and the diplomat just let her suffer alone. The next morning, Lee Sol felt even more restricted because Yoon-jo tightened the surveillance. Now everything the princess does must go through his approval as the director. He argued that this surveillance was to prevent the princess from escaping without the knowledge of the royal staff. Unwilling to be treated like a prisoner, Lee Sol asked all the staff to gather. While standing on a chair, she asserted that she would hold a press conference the next day and announced the legality of her position as the Princess of Joseon. Lee Sol promised to deliver a good speech and asked for the staff's guidance.
저에 관해 좋지 않은 이야기들이 떠도는 걸로 알고 있습니다.
Afterward, the core staff, including Yoon-jo, Hae-young, and Young-woo, held a meeting with the princess to discuss the material to be presented at the press conference. To undermine Lee Sol's confidence, Yoon-jo corrected her speech notes and laughed at her in front of everyone. However, it turned out that Hae-young and Young-woo defended her and forbade Yoon-jo from being too harsh in criticizing the princess, who was still a novice.
맥도 잘 짚었네요. 좀만 손 보면 되겠어요.
Without anyone knowing, Lee Sol began deleting her blog that was once registered on an entertainment site to avoid tarnishing her image. However, she found it difficult to delete it because the posts were locked after the writer received payment. In the end, Hae-young, who caught her hiding, immediately took action to delete the silly writings from several online tabloids. On the other hand, Grandpa was truly furious after hearing about his grandson's departure with the princess and their stay at a bay. To prevent any unwanted incidents, Grandpa invited Hae-young, Lee Sol, and Yoon-jo for a meal together and urged Hae-young to marry Yoon-jo immediately. Hearing Grandpa's command left Lee Sol very surprised. Unexpectedly, Yoon-jo firmly rejected Grandpa's request, even though Hae-young accepted it without any objection. The girl reasoned that she would marry Hae-young, not because of an order, but of her own free will. She didn't want to continue living under the shadow of orders.
예쁘게 처분받아서 하고 싶었습니다.
She turned to ask why Hae-young accepted Grandpa's command when he had previously doubted it because his assets had been seized. In the end, Hae-young admitted that he was willing to marry Yoon-jo, only to repay the favor to Mr. Oh, who was Grandpa's right-hand man. He emphasized that now his feelings of love for Yoon-jo have started to waver after discovering her affair with Young-woo. To retaliate for the affair, Hae-young is still willing to marry, but he must protect Lee Sol without being restrained by his partner. Meanwhile, Dan-ha suddenly came to the palace and lashed out at Lee Sol. The girl ransacked the entire princess's room and even intended to attack her with a bag. Fortunately, Hae-young quickly came to her defense and forbade her from setting foot in the palace while in an emotional state. Feeling responsible for the commotion, Hae-young visited the innkeeper and apologized because he was the one who spread the news, on his own initiative. He emphasized that Lee Sol knew nothing about it and never agreed to it.
전적으로 다 제가 한 일입니다.
While Hae-young was still talking with her mother, it turned out that Lee Sol was outside, unaware of the diplomat's arrival. From outside the door, she kept pleading for her mother and sister to forgive her. As a spoiled child, she began pouring out her worries to her mother. The girl revealed that she had fallen in love with her own enemy, yet strangely, she was deeply hurt when she heard the news of her enemy's marriage to another girl. After her heart felt relieved, she hurried back to the palace, even though she hadn't met her mother. However, not long after, she realized that Hae-young had heard all of her feelings. Feeling embarrassed, Lee Sol eventually intercepted Hae-young's car, but she was ignored. She then switched to intercepting a passing truck in order to chase after him.
빨리 좀 가자고요. 빨리요.
The press conference for the introduction of the princess is ready to be held at the palace. Unlike before, today only a handful of reporters came because the others were not allowed in by Yeon-cho. In the middle of her interrupted speech, Hae-young suggested that the princess continue her speech in the parking lot. So enthusiastic to welcome the reporters held outside, Lee Sol ran barefoot and gave her speech standing on a chair so everyone could hear her. In front of all the journalists, she emphasized that she still has a lot to learn to become a princess. She is not hesitant to accept criticism from the public, which can be sent via her email, even though she is inexperienced. She is confident that the staff behind her will support her to become the best. It didn't take long for the speech to successfully attract the attention of thousands of people who declared themselves as her supporters. Even the president was enthusiastic in giving appreciation and asked Hae-young to be more diligent in educating the princess to become a politician. Feeling guilty for having played with the princess, Hae-young took the time amidst her work to visit the crown prince's grave. She regretted often hurting the princess and also apologized for her father's actions in the past. Upon arriving at the palace, when she saw Lee Sol in pain with her foot, she immediately carried her to her room. Not far from there, Yeon-cho witnessed their closeness and realized that Hae-young had truly turned away. The next morning, Lee Sol asked Young-woo to take her to the orphanage where she lived before being adopted. She wanted to find her mother's bag, which could serve as historical evidence. However, upon arriving there, it turned out that Yeon-cho had already been there first and was looking for a similar bag to place in the museum. After finishing his business, Yeon-cho asked Young-woo to go home first because he wanted to chat with the princess. In a rather tense atmosphere, the two tried to stay relaxed and friendly while enjoying soju. To satisfy her curiosity, Lee Sol asked why Yeon-cho was once greedy and wanted two men at the same time. She suggested that Yeon-cho choose between the professor and Hae-young, so that Lee Sol could have one of them. However, the selfish Yeon-cho remained firm in her stance and was unwilling to let Lee Sol take either of them. She loved Young-woo with warmth, but she also needed Hae-young to achieve her ambitions. Because Lee Sol couldn't accept it and was furious upon hearing this, Yeon-cho boasted again that both men loved her very much and didn't mind being shared. She wanted to test them to prove whose love was the deepest. Yeon-cho sent a message to the two men to pick her up at the soju bar. Eventually, both of them arrived at the same time, and the woman immediately hugged Hae-young. This scene was truly painful and witnessed by Lee Sol and Young-woo. In Yeon-cho's embrace, Hae-young asserted that he would come anytime his fiancée asked. He even held her fingers to assure her that his heart had never strayed. Feeling unbearable jealousy, while shedding tears, Lee Sol tried to stop him from leaving. However, Hae-young ignored her and still chose Yeon-cho. Now the girl could only cry and vent her heartbreak to Young-woo.
안 오겠죠.
Meanwhile, Dan-ha, who was always envious of Lee Sol, tried to find a way to bring her down by handing over the Queen Mother's heirloom wallet to Professor Young-woo. She claimed the item as her own, even though she had stolen it from her sister. After being examined by a history expert, it turned out that the wallet was authentic. Even though it came from Dan-ha, Young-woo was convinced that the wallet rightfully belonged to Lee Sol.
향랑에 대해서 알고 있는 건 확실한데 갖고 있는지는 모르겠어.
The next day, Lee Sol was surprised after receiving many gifts and letters from her supporters. Immersed in happiness, she even replied to them one by one and then informed Hae-young. One of the letter senders was a presidential staff member who expressed love for the princess. Caught between embarrassment and disgust in admitting his jealousy, Hae-young immediately confiscated the letter and forbade her from fooling around. He ordered Lee Sol to study more diligently about political knowledge and constitutional law. Despite his harsh approach, Hae-young wanted to emphasize that her current position is not that of an idol, but a leader of the nation. The princess's popularity dominating the news topics made her a target for politicians, including the president and the opposition party council. Through Haeyoung, the president wanted to invite the princess to participate in a visit to the orphanage, where she was raised. By bringing in Lee Sol, the president would portray himself as the savior who leads the princess into the palace. Haeyoung gently declined by arguing that the princess was still too amateur and not ready to enter the political world. Upon arriving at the palace, she forbade Lee Sol from going anywhere without her permission. She didn't want the girl to be used as a tool in political battles, as it would be dangerous for her safety. Similarly, members of the opposition party council asked Yoon-ju to persuade the princess to support them in the campaign. However, Yoon-ju couldn't fulfill the politician's request yet, because she needed to get permission from the chairman's grandfather first. Before meeting the chairman, Yoon-ju greeted her father, who suddenly started talking about the dark secret of the crown prince's death. She was truly shocked after learning that Haeyoung's father had committed premeditated murder against the prince. Mr. Oh could no longer stand seeing Yoon-ju's actions of always opposing the princess, and wanted to stop her. It turns out he couldn't bear the thought of Yoon-ju becoming a traitor and meeting the same fate as Haeyoung's father.
그게 누가 진실을 알겠니?
At the same time, Haeyoung also heard a similar statement from her grandfather, that her father was the one who killed the crown prince. This is what has made the grandfather feel guilty all this time, and always want to atone for it. In the end, Haeyoung began to understand why she was instructed to become a diplomat rather than the director of Daehan Group. The reason was none other than because her grandfather intended to prepare her as the right hand of the royal family.
아버지 얘기입니다.
Even though his request was rejected by Haeyoung, the president still visited the orphanage with the princess, with Yeonju's approval. The woman agreed because she wanted to embarrass Lee Sol in front of the media and witness how naive the girl was, unaware that she was merely being used as a political tool. In fact, Lee Sol was truly confused and kept questioning why Haeyoung and Yeonju were not aligned in this visit plan.
기본적인 준비도 안 된 네가 어딜 가?
In the end, she took the initiative to invite the orphanage children to visit the palace. Once the orphanage children and the president's entourage had gathered, Lee Sol did not expect at all that the president had actually invited many journalists to interview her about her past life in the orphanage. Without thorough preparation, she was truly made nervous by it, until Haeyoung immediately moved to stop the interview to protect her. In front of all the journalists, Haeyoung emphasized that the royal family is not affiliated with any political party.
다시 한번 강조해서 말씀드립니다.
He then dragged the girl away and scolded her thoroughly. So emotional was he that he even called the girl truly stupid and unaware that she had just been used by the president for image building. Unable to say anything, after realizing her mistake, Lee Sol could only cry and lock herself in her room. In truth, Haeyoung felt regret for often hurting Lee Sol's feelings with his harsh words. He finally hurried to her room and asked her to stop aspiring to be a princess. He hated having to face Lee Sol as an enemy because he wanted to make her his girlfriend. With all her resolve, even though it was difficult for her, Lee Sol asserted that she couldn't return Haeyoung's feelings and would remain a princess no matter what. She couldn't possibly return the feelings of a man who lost his inheritance because of her presence.
대답 안 할 거야.
Hearing that, Haeyoung felt relieved, because he believed he had successfully taught the princess to be a firm woman who wouldn't easily be swayed by a man. The next morning, news about Haeyoung's rejection of the president's visit to the palace had spread widely across all media. The president was truly furious and considered Haeyoung a traitor for thwarting his plan to use the princess as a political tool. He punished Haeyoung by dismissing him from his position at the palace. Not only that, the president also emphasized that if Haeyoung continued to protect the princess, he would not only be dismissed from his job as a diplomat, but the president also threatened to organize massive demonstrations to overthrow the princess. Feeling worried about the president's threat, Hae-young decided to take a leave of absence for a while and promised to quit his job as the princess's tutor. He intended to go to New York to find his father, who was stranded there because he had been banned from entering Korea. Before leaving, Hae-young deliberately did not say goodbye to Lee Sol because he did not want to make her sad or feel guilty. He just wanted to invite her to have a meal together and go for a walk for just one day. Feeling nervous after rejecting his love, Lee Sol kept trying to avoid him.
싫어. 안 들어.
The princess even chose to go to the mall where her friend worked and hid inside a suitcase so Hae-young wouldn't find her. No matter how hard she tried to hide, Hae-young managed to find her after buying the suitcase where the princess was hiding. The two of them then took a walk in the ancient Joseon palace where they first met. All the visitors who saw the princess immediately scrambled to take a photo with her. Not wanting to miss the opportunity, Hae-young also wanted to take a photo as a keepsake. That night, Hae-young submitted his resignation letter in the princess's room. He also invited his adoptive mother to come to the palace to comfort him. After Hae-young officially resigned, the princess now has a new teacher who comes from a diplomatic background. Meanwhile, Yeon-ju, who continues to try to eliminate Lee Sol, then invites Lee Dan to collaborate in overthrowing the princess from her throne. With evidence of the authenticity of the Queen of Joseon's heirloom purse, which he claimed as his own, Lee Dan, who was always envious of his adoptive sister, intended to displace Lee Sol and declare himself as the princess in front of everyone. Lee Dan's arrival at the palace immediately shocked the entire family, causing Hae-young to be forced to halt her departure to America. Following Yeon-ju's orders, Lee Dan recounted his life story, which was exactly like what Lee Sol experienced. He even pretended as if he were the daughter of the crown prince who was always fleeing from enemies. Even the grandfather was left astonished after Lee Dan mentioned that Hae-young's father was closely connected to the crown prince's departure.
하지만 진실은 결국 밝혀지는 거잖아.
The account from her foster sister truly shocked Lee Sol to the core, because in her childhood, she experienced amnesia and doesn't remember anything about Hae-young's father. After successfully causing a stir in the palace, Yeon-ju continued to spread the news across all media regarding Princess Lee Sol's status, which has yet to be fully recognized. Because for her, Lee Dan is more deserving and convincing to be called princess. Yeon-ju is determined to do whatever it takes, as long as she can get rid of Lee Sol. Lee Dan's statement in front of everyone made the grandfather truly furious. Now the grandfather accuses Hae-young of being the mastermind who instructed her to falsely claim to be the princess in order to eliminate Lee Sol. Without denying it, Hae-young admits that she indeed wants to get rid of Lee Sol.
맞아요. 저 맞아요.
On the other hand, after hearing that Hae-young's father is connected to her own father, Lee Sol wants to confirm the truth with Yeon-ju. In the end, Yeon-ju explains everything, revealing that Hae-young's father is the cause of the crown prince's death. She emphasizes that her son is not much different and will find a way to eliminate the princess. Before it's too late, Yeon-ju advises her to step down from the throne and go abroad. Upon learning this fact, Lee Sol is truly shocked and now looks at Hae-young with a different gaze. Lee Sol is caught in a dilemma between love and doubt in her heart about what happened to her father in the past. She can't easily believe that Hae-young, who has always supported her, would act like her father because of a power struggle. Being a princess is not an easy matter for her. Before one problem is resolved, another problem comes in succession. After Lee Dan found the queen's heirloom wallet, the public became disappointed with Lee Sol and spread hateful remarks, accusing her of being a fraud pretending to be a princess. Various derogatory comments have flooded the media, prompting Hae-young to suggest that she publish her childhood photos from when the prince was still alive. However, it turns out that Lee Sol has not agreed to it yet. She is worried that her adoptive brother will be imprisoned Even when cornered, Lee Sol still wants to protect her brother, who has been cruel to her.
그럼 우리 언니는요? 언니는 어떻게 되는 건데요?
The only option for her is to keep her promise to Yeon-chu and be willing to leave the palace. However, she doesn't want to leave forever, but only temporarily to seek the truth about her father's death, which is also related to Haeyoung's father. After packing all her belongings, Lee Sol threatened Yeon-chu that she would definitely return and prove the truth. She is convinced that Yeon-chu deliberately sowed discord between her and Haeyoung because he doesn't like the diplomat continually siding with her. While pulling her suitcase, the princess began to move to gather information about anyone who had known her father, including a homeowner by the beach, where her father used to work as a fisherman.
그래서 왔어요. 여쭤볼 게 있어서요.
From the homeowner's account, she recalled that the crown prince decided to move away from the fishing village because there was a wealthy man who constantly threatened him. Unfortunately, the homeowner did not know the exact identity of the man who was pursuing the crown prince. Not wanting to give up, Lee Sol turned to the police station and inquired about anyone who knew her father before he was declared dead in the accident. However, at that time, the results were nil because the police could not provide clear information about the perpetrator who hit the crown prince. Moreover, there were influential people who cleared his name. Afterward, Lee Sol continued to contact the Daehan Group Information Center operator to request the phone numbers of people who knew her father. Even though she contacted all the related numbers, it turned out that none of them could give her a definite answer regarding the relationship between her father and Haeyoung's father. Not much different, Haeyoung also tried to find her father's whereabouts by repeatedly calling his phone contacts. Unfortunately, her father never answered those calls. Caught between disappointment, emotions, and anger, Haeyoung couldn't accept the reality that her father was a murderer. She wanted to ask for clarification directly so that the hostility wouldn't repeat between her and Lee Sol.
다 잊으셨어요?
Upon hearing the news that Lee Sol had fled the palace, Haeyoung tried to find her in several places, including her foster mother's inn and her friend's office. However, the princess was not there. She then turned to meet Lee Dan and persuaded him to admit his mistakes. She emphasized that Lee Sol was willing to give in and leave the palace for her sake. However, Lee Dan completely ignored Haeyoung and trusted Yeon-ju more, who promised to send him abroad if the situation became more critical. Growing more anxious, Haeyoung was forced to invite Yeon-ju to her home to inquire about the princess's whereabouts. With a feeling of anger, Yeon-ju admitted that she deliberately drove her out of the palace so as not to disturb her peaceful life with Haeyoung.
궁으로 못 돌아와요, 절대로.
In the end, Haeyoung moved to find Lee Sol at a cafe. It turned out that the princess was trying to escape from the cafe patrons who caught her napping. In her panic, Lee Sol even bumped into a patron and accidentally spilled coffee, resulting in her being insulted. To protect Lee Sol from the crowd of patrons, after paying for the spilled coffee, Haeyoung then dragged her away and took her to Professor Youngwoo's house. Because that was the only place safe from Yeon-ju's pursuit.
같이 온 거야?
It turned out, Haeyoung's assumption was completely wrong. Even though they were at the professor's house, Yeon-ju still tried to chase Lee Sol, claiming she wanted to take her to meet the chairman's grandfather. Yeon-ju wanted Lee Sol to confess in front of the grandfather that she intentionally ran away from the palace and would never return there again. Before Lee Sol could agree to Yeon-ju's request, Haeyoung suddenly intervened and insisted that she would never allow the princess to go with Yeon-ju. She suddenly pulled her away and took her to a villa quite far from Seoul. Unexpectedly, it turned out that Haeyoung brought Lee Sol to visit the residence of Mr. Park Tae-jun, who is none other than her father. Haeyoung apparently brought her to that place on purpose to find some clarity about her father's whereabouts. The villa they visited turned out to hold many memories for Lee Sol. Vaguely, the princess remembered Haeyoung's father coming out the door and welcoming her. Upon arriving at the villa, the two appeared very affectionate as a couple deeply in love. The two embraced each other facing the bonfire at night when the weather was so cold, until the next morning. Hae-young styled Lee Sol's messy hair with a strawberry hair tie, the last gift from her father. However, all their happiness suddenly faded after Lee Sol received a call from Mr. Park Tae-jun, who begged her to persuade her grandfather to allow him to return to Korea. Hearing Hae-young's father's voice, Lee Sol was truly shocked and immediately asked for clarification regarding her father's death.
우리 아빠 돌아가신 거 아니죠?
Firmly, Mr. Tae-jun denied it, but he admitted to regretting his actions that always made the crown prince run away. Slowly, memories of her childhood began to resurface. She clearly remembered when Hae-young's father asked her to stay at the villa after her father was declared dead. She was truly disappointed and decided to leave Hae-young alone and complain to her grandfather. As soon as the princess arrived at the president-director's residence, her grandfather immediately apologized profusely for the unavoidable death of the crown prince. He admitted that the cause of all this chaos was the struggle for the throne and the grandfather's injustice towards his son.
이 죄 많은 역신을 죽여주시옵소서.
Because she doesn't want the same thing to happen, Lee Sol insists that she doesn't want to be a princess and would rather live peacefully with her simple adoptive mother. If her grandfather insists on making her a princess, it will eventually have fatal consequences for her and Ha-young. Hearing the princess's statement, the grandfather was truly shocked and didn't expect it, to the point where he fainted and was rushed to the hospital. Although he went through a critical period, the grandfather eventually regained consciousness and kept pleading for Yeon Chu and her father to bring the princess back to the palace immediately. Upon learning that the grandfather had regained consciousness and was still looking for her, Lee Sol remained steadfast in her decision to return to her mother.
저 일단 펜션으로 가려고요.
On one hand, Ha-young felt truly pressured after Lee Sol discovered the truth of the secret. She also felt guilty for being the reason the crown prince ran away. Before Lee Sol left, Ha-young tried to convince her that he was different from his father and would always support Lee Sol, not wanting to destroy her. However, Lee Sol ignored him and wanted to return to her adoptive mother. Meanwhile, Yong-gu unexpectedly revealed astonishing news to Yeon Chu that the historical wallet brought by Lee Dan was actually a fake created by his adoptive father. To her utter surprise, the professor deliberately deceived Yeon Chu and Lee Dan because he wanted his former lover to stop bothering the princess and step down from his position as the executive director of the Palace Foundation.
지금부터 내 말 잘 들어. 마지막 기회 줄게.
Before Lee Dan was arrested by the police, Yeon Chu gave him a sum of hush money and provided him with a ticket to travel abroad, to escape. He also prepared a scholarship for him, as long as he remained silent in front of the investigators. However, before he could escape, Ha-young managed to stop Lee Dan and freeze his accounts. Considering his crime, deemed fatal, for forging historical artifacts and impersonating the princess, Lee Dan is now declared a national fugitive and is banned from flying to any airport. Currently, the princess's adoptive brother is completely powerless in front of Ha-young. Upon arriving at the inn, Lee Sol went about her usual activities. She cleaned the house, prepared food for her mother, and fed the 2 guard dogs in front of the inn. Every time she saw the room that Ha-young once occupied, she felt an overwhelming sense of longing. However, she tried to deny her feelings because of the hatred in her heart. Not much different, Ha-young also felt tormented because Lee Sol had come to hate her. She went to the inn just to relieve her longing. However, Lee Sol, who was fed up, didn't welcome her at all and immediately went inside the house and locked the door. She completely ignored Ha-young, who kept knocking on the door to apologize.
그러니까 이러지 마라, 어?
Afternoon until night, Ha-young shivered outside while waiting for the daughter to open the door. Half desperate, Ha-young, exhausted from waiting, finally cried and shouted outside until Lee Sol heard her. She kept apologizing for her father's mistakes and promised to atone for all her past sins. She was willing to become a slave forever as long as Lee Sol would forgive her. The diplomat, who had already fallen in love, now felt unable to bear losing Lee Sol. It didn't matter if he had to lose his entire inheritance, even his life, as long as the princess was willing to return. Honestly, Lee Sol was touched by Ha-young's plea, but she couldn't bring herself to show up. Before truly leaving, Ha-young shouted and expressed her feelings, that she loved Lee Sol very much. Hearing that expression of feelings, Lee Sol suddenly opened the door for her, and Ha-young landed a kiss on the princess's lips. After embracing and kissing each other tenderly, Ha-young insisted on staying at the inn, despite Lee Sol's continuous objections. Her body felt almost frozen from being outside all day. She wanted the princess to apply a cold compress to her forehead, but Lee Sol, acting coldly, continued to ignore her request.
연락 안 나. 뜨겁지?
The next day, while they were having breakfast, Ha-young deliberately didn't eat a single bite, hoping to get sick, so that Lee Sol would touch and take care of her. Honestly, deep down, she was tormented by the hateful stares, and promised to do anything as long as the princess would return to her cheerful self, as before. That night, unexpectedly, Ha-young invited Lee Sol's friends, along with the loyal palace servants, to visit the inn. Everything was done so that the princess wouldn't feel lonely. The cheerfulness truly felt real when Losman was visited by many people, and the princess appeared to smile joyfully, momentarily forgetting her suffering. Even laughter and jokes sounded crisp when the palace chef opened Haeyoung's phone, which turned out to contain funny videos about the princess. While Haeyoung and Lee Sol were happy, it was a different story for Yeonju, who was in mourning. Because she was considered to have made a fatal mistake and forged the queen's heirloom wallet, Younghwa invited all board members and high-ranking officials to discuss and dismiss her from her position as executive director. Now Yeonju is not allowed to interfere in any matters related to the kingdom and the Daehan group. Everything she did was not without reason. She wanted to stop Yeonju's heinous actions against the princess, which were getting out of hand.
널 넘어뜨릴 수 있는 기회니까.
The next morning, to atone for her family's past mistakes, Haeyoung invited journalists to hold a press conference. For her, this was the only way for Lee Sol to slightly diminish her hatred towards the Daehan group family. Her statement in front of the public was truly shocking. Haeyoung was the only generation of Daehan who dared to admit that her family had made many mistakes against the royal family for personal gain. She revealed a big secret that no one knew, that Grandpa Priester had built the Daehan Group company with the wealth belonging to Emperor Lee Yun. In fact, that wealth should have belonged to his descendants. In front of the public, she admitted that her father was once someone who strongly opposed the efforts to restore the lineage, because he didn't want his inheritance to be taken away. However, now she is so wise as she apologizes for her family's sins and hands everything over to the princess. She also asks the public to always protect the princess. Hearing Haeyoung's statement in the media, Grandpa, who was lying in the hospital, felt truly proud of his granddaughter's bravery. All this time, Grandpa lived in the shadow of guilt towards the crown prince, and now it is his granddaughter who is able to atone for it.
황실 재건에 따른
Haeyoung's strong demeanor made Grandpa feel relieved, to the point where he felt he could now leave the world in peace. Before taking his last breath, Grandpa asked Haeyoung to dedicate herself to the princess until the end of her life. Grandpa's passing left a deep sorrow for Haeyoung and the entire family, including Yeonju, who vented all the blame for what happened on the princess. She kept blaming Lee Sol because her presence was considered a disaster. She berated Lee Sol harshly, saying that if Lee Sol weren't there, Grandpa and Haeyoung's lives would have been peaceful. Caught between anger, hatred, and sadness, Lee Sol also felt guilty because she was burdened. Whether true or not, her presence indeed brought many changes to the Daehan group family.
누구보다 아프고 외롭게 자랐어.
After Grandpa's funeral ceremony, Lee Sol stayed at home in contemplation filled with emptiness. She eventually returned to the palace at the request of Haeyoung and all the people of Korea. This time, she was determined to return not as an oppressed princess, but as a strong princess with full authority. The first thing she did was fire Yeonju from his position as museum director. She also expelled him from the Daehan group. To this day, he no longer has anything to be proud of. The two men who were always by his side have now switched to supporting the princess.
완전 좋아할 텐데.
좋죠.
Happy with Lee Sol's decision, Yeonju approached the opposition party council and sought ways to bring Haeun's father back to Korea to fight against the kingdom. To anticipate this, Haeun decided to fly to New York to meet her father. Before leaving, she bid farewell to Lee Sol and gifted her a potted plant. During the months, without Haeun's presence, Lee Sol became truly bored with her new private tutor. She always looked for the tutor's mistakes to make them uncomfortable, because she preferred studying on her own. As the nights passed, Lee Sol felt lonely in the palace without her beloved. After reading a book, she recalled the beautiful memories with Haeung by the fountain, and hoped her lover would suddenly come and carry her like back then. Unexpectedly, when the clumsy Lee Sol almost slipped, she suddenly fell right into Haeung's arms. The princess and the diplomat truly expressed their pent-up longing after months apart. Honestly, Lee Sol felt upset for being left without any news, but she finally breathed a sigh of relief, seeing her lover return happily, landing kisses on her cheek multiple times. His goal in going to America has now been achieved. He wanted to meet his father and ask him to relinquish his inheritance to the royal family. After meeting Lee Sol, Hae-young met with the royal family's personal lawyer and immediately handed over the inheritance transfer documents signed by his father.
유류분에 대한 권리를 주장하지 않겠다는 제 아버지 서명입니다.
Hae-young then went to see Yeonju and asked his former fiancée to truly forget about him. He no longer wanted to be involved in any relationship with that girl, after learning about all the wrongdoings she had committed all this time. Currently, Yeonju is no longer a high-ranking director, but just an ordinary resort employee, starting her career from the bottom. Meanwhile, Yeonju's father wanted to arrange a marriage for his daughter with an analyst, but the man ended up mocking Yeonju for her declining career, which no longer shone as it once did. Yeonju has reaped what she sowed. However, even though her career isn't as bright as it used to be, Youngwoo still chose her and declared his love, saying he wanted to start their relationship anew. Yeonju had no other choice but to welcome his feelings. Meanwhile, Hae-young, who has now officially become the main heir of Daehan, was not yet willing to sign the inheritance transfer agreement to the royal family. His puzzling attitude left Lee Sol and Youngwoo bewildered. They thought Hae-young was like his father. However, it turned out that Hae-young deliberately hadn't signed the inheritance transfer because he wanted to use his wealth as a tool to garner support from politicians, so they would side with Lee Sol in the approval poll for the restoration of the Joseon monarchy. All this time, the president was able to serve as the #1 person in Korea, thanks to campaign funds from his grandfather, and now the opposition party council is approaching Hae-young to secure funding for their campaign. However, Hae-young refused because the opposition council always opposed the monarchy. Meanwhile, Lee Sol, who feels anxious because Hae-young has not yet intended to give her the inheritance, instead causes trouble to make him jealous. The princess claims she was going to meet a conglomerate man who proposed to her, which made Hae-young furious, and he kept scolding her when she was about to study.
좀 이거 괜히 달려있는 게 아니라고 멋으로.
In the end, Hae-young explained his plan to the princess, that he hadn't signed the inheritance transfer, just to gain support from the politicians. With an adorable face, he kept kissing Lee Sol repeatedly, and asked her to reject proposals from any man. In order to learn the ins and outs of the Daehan company that would be her right, Lee Sol pleaded with Yeonju's father, Mr. Oh, to serve as the chief director of the Royal Foundation. Because all this time, she has dedicated her life to helping her grandfather. Mr. Oh is the only person who can be trusted, even though his daughter is always hostile towards him. 2 days before the general election, Hae-young has transferred the entire Daehan family inheritance to the princess, which will later be managed by a foundation, and the profits will be donated to the people. Before the election begins, he wants to take the princess on a date wearing simple clothes and without any security detail. He wants to enjoy street food and stroll through the city streets. Inheritance handover was apparently used by problematic journalists to bring down Hae-young and Lee Sol. The journalists spread the news that Hae-young's purpose in handing over the inheritance was a form of money laundering and tax evasion. He also revealed a number of pieces of evidence that showed that Hae-young deliberately had a romantic relationship with Princess so the inheritance would remain in his hands. The journalist wanted to convince the public that the conglomerate's son and the princess only wanted to secure their wealth without any intention of contributing to the people. To resolve the complications ahead of the election, the princess called a group of reporters and clarified that she and Hae-young truly loved each other and had absolutely no intention of manipulating the inheritance for their own benefit. With this honesty, she hoped that the public would decide whether the restoration of the royal bloodline would gain support or not. The long-awaited day finally arrived. During the vote counting, Hae-young escorted the princess to her room to avoid stress from the vote count. Time rolled on 2 years later. The princess returned to her campus by bicycle, followed by her bodyguards. Apparently, a lot had happened over the course of those 2 years. Upon returning to campus, Lee Sol remains a student whose grades don't improve. She resumed her archaeology studies under the guidance of Professor Yeonju. Due to personal sentiments, Yeonju often made Lee Sol emotional while she was on campus. She even gave her an F for frequent absences and made her distribute exam papers to other students. He was apparently on a national assignment who's serving as a diplomatic representative stationed in London. He didn't send any word at all to the princess until leaving his lover overwhelmed with longing. On her 27th birthday, the princess kept hoping for a call and a gift from her boyfriend, but what she longed for never came. Because of her popularity, Lee Sol received various marriage proposals from foreign nobles from Thailand and Japan. However, Lee Sol doesn't want to reply at all because she misses Hae-young so much.
공주님 생일에 세계에서 제일 먼저 축하해주고 싶대요.
Now, she is busy filming various commercials for the Department of Culture and Tourism. She has successfully introduced Joseon's cuisine and culture to people all around the world. In the midst of his busyness, Lee Sol still has to learn how to drive and still having trouble driving, so she has yet to pass and get her driver's license. In the middle of practice, suddenly Hae-young came and stopped her, who surprised and touched. She immediately expressed her very deep longing by warmly hugging her boyfriend through the car window. After being apart for 2 truly long years, Hae-young wanted to propose to Lee Sol right away, but his wedding plans didn't receive the president's blessing. Citing official duties, the president asked him to serve as one of the UN secretaries in Washington. To be honest, he found it hard to leave Korea since he had just reunited with his girlfriend. In the end, heavy heart, he decided not to give the diamond ring to Lee Sol. While in South Korea, he was occupied with numerous and significant agendas to the point of having to, for a while, set aside his promise to the princess. Unable to tolerate Hae-young's attitude of prioritizing work over her, Lee Sol eventually went to the council member's office and threatened to break up if Hae-young didn't promptly provide certainty about when he would marry her. She even pretended to cry day and forbade Hae-young from entering her room. Finally, Hae-young successfully persuaded her and promised to find Emperor Lee Yun's documents stored in the London Museum, as long as the princess didn't end their relationship. How incredibly happy Lee Sol was when she heard that Hae-young had promised to return her grandfather's very valuable manuscript. However, it turned out that the London Museum required a meeting with Professor Yeonju before handing over the manuscript. What can be done? Finally, Lee Sol asked for help from Yeonju, the archaeologist, to retrieve the historical artifact. Although the two were once at odds with each other, they have now both moved on and opened their hearts to their respective partners. On the other hand, surprising news comes from Danha, the adopted older sister of the princess, who has been living a wandering life without clarity because she fears imprisonment. Directly, Lee Sol visited her extremely cramped living space and scolded her thoroughly for her past crimes. The two ended up in a heated argument, pulling each other's hair like children fighting over a toy. With the generosity of the princess, Danha has been released from fugitive status and allowed to take the civil service selection test. She hopes her older sister can get a promising and successful career and return to their mother's home. Now, she has opened the palace to both domestic and international visitors, allowing them to learn more about the royal family's lineage. As thanks to his achievements, Lee Sol asked Hae-young for a gift to give her certainty about when he would propose. However, it turns out that Hae-young appears quite upset because he cannot marry the princess in the near future due to the reason that he has to go on a business trip to Washington for several years. Hearing that, Lee Sol was truly disappointed and accused Hae-young of having a lover abroad. Firmly, Hae-young denies the accusation and claimed that the diamond ring was only for Lee Sol. Hae-young revealed that he wants to marry Lee Sol before leaving for Washington and invited her to live together there. However, Lee Sol refused to go because she still had a lot of work to finish in Korea. The next day, Hae-young was filled with doubt as he prepared to leave alone at the airport. Honestly, he hoped Lee Sol would see him off. And unexpectedly, while sitting on the plane, it turned out that Lee Sol was right next to him and revealed that she would go anywhere to accompany Hae-young. A kiss landed tenderly on her lips, and Lee Sol responded with a more passionate kiss.